electricity aggregation. And Commissioner Barnett, if you wanted to introduce it further, be my guest.
Municipal aggregation is I'll probably get corrected by the experts shortly, but it's a relatively new to the state of Illinois opportunity for municipalities to essentially cooperatively and as a municipality as a whole purchase electricity. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the various ads from electric suppliers over the last probably 2 years is when they've really started ramping up. There are many of them out there, and this is, you can purchase electricity now as the actual electricity itself from a variety of folks. Distribution is still by Commonwealth Edison. Some of the companies that provide this service specialize in things like renewable energy. Others are purely cost-driven, but the concept of municipal aggregation allows the municipality to cooperatively purchase electricity, ideally at a rate that would result in a savings to both the municipality and its residents. So with that, we have a presentation tonight from a resident who's in this business and would like to bring us up to speed a little bit.
So thank you for introducing that, Commissioner, and we do appreciate the opportunity to hear more about this topic in a generic sense, because I understand that there's a few players out in this market, so the idea is for us to get some better information about what exactly this is, what some of the benefits might be, and then at some point in time we might or might not consider pursuing it in the normal fashion that we would whenever we do anything. Of course, it's always done by an RFP process. But in terms of getting ourselves better educated, we appreciate you coming down, so welcome, and please, I invite you to introduce yourself, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tully, and Commissioner Barnett, thank you for the introduction as well. My name is Richard Spilkey. I am a resident of Downers Grove. I'm here partly as a resident, but also as an employee of my company. My colleague, Dean Nickel, who's beside me here, he and I have made about a dozen or so of these presentations, give or take, to a number of communities in the Chicagoland area in a similar fashion. So indeed our company is one of the ones that's pursuing this type of business, as you indicated. And so I did put together about a dozen slides here that I gave a hard copy and also an electronic copy that we can cover. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes to cover this information, I don't think. But I do believe it's significant. I think it's interesting, and I think it is an important thing to do. Whether or not the city chooses to go forward with my company or any other, I do think it is in the best interest of our town, our village, to pursue it. So there's a few points I'll make here. You can see them on your slides yourself. I'm on slide 2. There's been a few market and regulatory changes that have occurred, which I'll touch on, which have created this opportunity. There's been a pretty positive and affirmative response. This was even on the front page of the Chicago Tribune as recently as last week about this phenomenon happening throughout the state of Illinois. Really, it's not just happening in ComEd, it's throughout the state. I will estimate some back of the envelope calculations, I call them, about how much money we're talking about here, of how much savings the village citizens might receive as a consequence of going forward. Then I will put forward a few recommendations that I have to consider to go forward with the idea, and then we'll just have Q&A if there is any. Slide number 3. This bar chart is showing, as Mayor Tully indicated, the competition is fierce for your electric business these days. This bar chart is showing since 1999, the yellow bars indicate how many businesses were certified and licensed to sell electricity in Illinois to business customers, not homes, business customers. And you can see this year right now there's 37 companies certified going after the business community. About 13 of those, the red bar on the far right, about 13 of those, or exactly 13 of those, are certified to sell to residential customers. And the reason that bar went up so high in 2011 is because of the legislation that we're going to talk about, and also because of the new tariffs that both ComEd and the utility in Southern Illinois, Ameren, introduced, which enabled this to reach out to residential customers in a more cost-effective way, which I'll explain. The other interesting bullet point that a lot of people are unaware of, if you look at the third bullet point down on this slide, right now as we speak, 80% of the energy, the vast majority of the energy that's flowing to the business community, so not the homes, is not coming from ComEd. 80% of that energy is coming from one of these 37 companies that's competing fiercely for the business community's electricity business, and that's where it's coming from, and a lot of people are surprised to hear that. In fact, most of the businesses in Downers Grove have also chosen an alternative supplier, and in the school district, among them. The next slide is one of the reasons why we're here today. About 6 or 8 months ago, this Public Act 96-0176 that you see listed there, and I forwarded a copy of this to the village manager recently. This is the law that allowed communities, and that's what we're here to talk about, it allows city councils to put forward a referendum and ask the citizens if they want to negotiate on their behalf for a better rate in an opt-out, what's called an opt-out aggregation program. So as the second bullet indicates, essentially the aggregation allows communities to combine the residents into one buying group, and it results in a much better price, and I'll talk about some figures in a few minutes about what that means. But it gives the citizen, or it gives the city council the right if the referendum is passed. The other portion of it, I mentioned opt-out. Each citizen will have the opportunity to opt out. If they don't want to be part of it, if they've already signed up with another company on their own, or they don't want to be part of it for whatever reason they may have, no one is forced to be part of the aggregation. They can all choose to opt out for any reason they have. Slide 5. This is a slide that shows that already 20 towns have passed referendums just like this. Last April, 20 towns passed this referendum. 2 towns had it on the ballot and did not pass it for various reasons, but the vast majority of them, 20 out of 22, did. So these towns are listed above, and many of these towns, as we speak, in fact about half of them already have chosen an alternative supplier for their residents, and the other half are in the process of doing so. So obviously there's an appetite for this that's been growing. The other interesting thing about this slide is these folks, or these towns, passed these referendums back in April, when a lot of the questions were still, the answers to the questions were unknown of exactly how this worked and what's the process and what are the rules, and a lot of that was unknown at the time. We know a heck of a lot more now about how it works than we did back then. So these towns were, I would say, proactive and quite a bit ahead of it. The point is there's an appetite for this that appears to be growing. Slide 7 is probably an important slide. Here we're talking about, or pardon me, we're on slide 6. Slide 6 is talking about the savings and some estimates for savings. Right now, each one of you could go home tonight, hop on the internet, click on our company's website or one of the other 13 companies' websites, and choose a different supplier if you know your ComEd account number. It only takes 5 minutes. And you would receive, 10% savings, 12% savings, depending upon whatever the offer may be. So everyone in Downers Grove could do that tonight if they were so inclined. But this concept of aggregation of the buying group drives the savings even more. And so if you look at the bottom bullet point here, and again, I'm being conservative because I don't want to overstate something, but based on today's forward curve, we think we can get at least another 5% savings on top of our 13% savings that we're showing on the internet today. And this is common not just for our company, but for all the other companies that are offering this service. Now slide 7. Slide 7 is one I'd like to draw your attention to. I've done a back of an envelope calculation. So I'm not, standing here saying that absolutely to the penny this is the way it would be, but I've tried to be conservative, and I've assumed an 85% participation rate, which is about the average that we've seen in the communities that we've worked with in the past. And based on the average home and the average usage and the average participation rate of 85, I've estimated that if everyone tonight got on the internet in Downers Grove and switched to just our ordinary posted price at our company, they would save about $1.8 million a year. However, through aggregation, based on the prices we're starting to see that are being offered to communities that aggregate, you can see the savings on the third bullet point goes up dramatically, more than double, to $3.8 million. So we're talking about a pretty significant amount of money of annual savings that the residents of Downers Grove would enjoy, based on some rough numbers here. Slide 8 is communicating the fact that the bill you receive is still coming from ComEd. This is one of the agreements that we reached with ComEd and also with Ameren, which is the utility in central and southern Illinois, whereby they will continue to offer the billing service on our behalf. With our business customers, we bill ourselves. But we have approximately 20,000 business customers. We don't have millions of business customers, and ComEd has a system that's much more able to bill the millions of customers than ours. So this is one of the cost savings This is one of the reasons why that red bar jumped up and all of a sudden there's 13 companies that are now able to do the residential market, is because of this billing service that ComEd is offering. ComEd is also offering, and we pay them for this, there's a fee, it's not free. I believe it's approximately 1.7% that we pay them, just so you know what the number is. They're also offering what's called the purchase of receivables. We call that the POR. So in other words, folks who are unable to pay their bill or who don't pay their bill, if that happens today, ComEd has the ability to shut people off, and there's rules around that, and those rules stay in place. So those rules don't change. And so if the customer is with us as a supplier, ComEd can still enforce the shut-off rule because it's still a bill coming from ComEd. And so that's another reason why all these marketers like our company and the others have jumped into the business, is because this allows us to not have to check the credit of every single homeowner when they want to become a customer, because the credit is taken care of through this POR program. Slide number 9 is an example. This is a real bill from a real person, and this is from the month, just a recent month. This is from June 6th to July 6th, you can see. And so the top part of the bill is what we're talking about here. The top part of this person's bill is what we call the supply charges. And you can see that there's 3 parts to the supply charges when they're with ComEd. There's the energy charge itself, which you can see is 7.1 cents. There's the transmission charge, which is about 0.7 cents. And then there's this thing called the purchased electricity adjustment, which a rate is not shown, but you can see on this person's bill for that month it was $7. And so what's happening here is when you're with ComEd, and most of the residents still are with ComEd, these are the prices that they're paying, and these rates are set by the Illinois Power Authority. The Illinois Power Authority is a state government agency that's tasked with purchasing the power on behalf of the utilities, ComEd and Ameren, in the state of Illinois. And then these rates are established, which are pretty close to what the costs are, but ComEd doesn't make any profit or loss on the energy supply part of the bill. And that's why you have that $7 adder in this particular case, in this particular example, because those rates didn't quite capture all the costs that ComEd incurred in delivering power that month. And so this person had to pay an extra $7 this month for that, what we'll call the purchased electricity adjustment, so that ComEd would break even on the deal. That could also be a negative number, but in most cases it's been a positive number based on the history that I've seen. But if you just add up the 2 fixed rates, which I've done there in orange, you can see it's about 7.92 cents for that bill. Okay, so now this person switched providers, and now this person paid I can't quite read the number, $134, and if you divide by the amount of kilowatt hours they used a lot more kilowatt hours this month than the previous month because it was a hot August and July and so forth, but they paid 6.45 cents. And this is just, through a standard switch. And so they saved $41, which I've calculated down there at the bottom. Now the middle part of the bill is the delivery services. That's what ComEd charges to deliver the power, regardless of if they're with an alternative supplier or with the ComEd supply source. And the bottom part, of course, is the taxes. And so those 2 sections, the delivery services and the taxes section, neither of those change. The only thing that changes is the top. And the top portion is what we're talking about, and that's where the savings is derived. Now, the other interesting thing is the top portion of the bill is about 2/3 of the dollars that are in each bill. So it's the majority of the dollars in that top part, and that's where the savings come from. So for this particular month, this individual saved $41. This is another important point I want to make, this slide. Let's see, this is number 11. And again, I don't want to be too technical, but this will be an ingredient and one of the reasons why I have a recommendation for the council when I conclude in a few moments. This is simply a chart that shows the forward curve of power on any given day. So for example, if someone wanted to buy, we'll look at the red line. The red line is 2013. If someone wanted to buy power in 2013, and they wanted to buy a whole year's worth, and this is the market that the competitive market operates in, and if they would have done it on the far left-hand part of the chart in the beginning of 09, if we wanted to buy power for 2013, but we wanted to do it in the beginning of 09, we would have paid around $50 a megawatt hour, which is about 5 cents. If you look at the graph, you can see the economy went down, which we all know, in about the first quarter of 09, and it dropped. The market bumps up and down. The point is, the market moves just like the stock exchange moves, and it moves up and down from time to time. When entities go out for an RFP and they think they're getting the best deal because they're going out with an RFP, what's happening is my company and all the rest of the companies that are competing to win the business will look at the forward curve. We'll say, okay, the cost of power today is $40. We want to add, say, a $2 margin ourselves to make a profit. Maybe our competitor will add 2 1/4. Maybe a more aggressive competitor will add $1.75 and they'll be a quarter less than us. And then they'll win the bid on that day because they took the thinnest margin. And that's, you know, how the competitive process works, and that's okay. But the maximum value comes not so much by squeezing a quarter out of the supplier or 50 cents out of the supplier. The maximum value comes by locking in when we can get the maximum savings and the maximum value for the residential community. And that may or may not happen on the given day that the RFP is due. We're just getting a snapshot of the market on that day that the RFP is due. And again, I think that we're maybe saving quarters and dimes, but we're not saving the dollars that we could save by locking in at the right time. Slide 12, I'm almost finished. You know, I understand that the wheels of government sometimes move slowly, is what I'm told. Nevertheless, you know, in order to realize these savings and capture this value that currently exists, I am suggesting that we do need to move forward. The timeline is indicating that if we're going to put this on the referendum for the March election, that the deadline for that is January 3rd. The next opportunity would be the general election, which is November 6th, and the deadline for submitting that to get it on the referendum, or to get the referendum submitted at the county level, is August 20th, according to our research. So I'm here to advocate for the first date, if possible, and obviously that's a city council decision to make and to consider. The final slide I have here is just a recommendation, and that is, again, the savings are available today. The forward curve is enabling us to procure the power and get savings the way I've showed on slide 7. And so our recommendation is that the city find a partner that offers the aggregation services and the supply both to provide the maximum value. So perhaps an RFQ could come out and solicit suppliers. Naturally, our company would be interested, and there probably would be a few more that have the wherewithal to handle this type of a project, to stand with the city council, or the city council would, you know, be confident giving their recommendation behind that company with all the services that go along with communicating with the citizens, educating them, putting out the information so that citizens understand what an opt-out program is, how it works, and all the RFP support that goes along with that. So that is our recommendation. We think that gets the maximum value for the citizens and still allows the city to solicit bids from different companies. So with that, I'll conclude. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I can, or my colleague Dean would be glad to do it too.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Certainly appreciate the informative presentation with respect to the opportunity, and you know, whether it's something that, like other communities, we should take advantage of potentially. I had a number of questions because I haven't looked into this before, although it's interesting, in the last 6 months I've heard from a lot of those 13. So you're clearly identifying a hot topic these days, and did see the Trib article. Just for the clarification of not only myself, but also anyone in the audience listening at home, this whole discussion is focused on price, not reliability. Is that correct?
Right. It's interesting that you had the topic of ComEd and the reliability and what have you. I want to make it very clear that ComEd is still in charge of the reliability and reading the meters and fixing the poles, and if a tree knocks a line down, the ComEd truck is still the folks responsible. I also want to make it clear, because this has been misunderstood, this does not harm ComEd financially in any way. If someone chooses Integris or another one of the competitors and not ComEd any longer, ComEd is not harmed financially. They break even on that top part of the bill, like I showed you, regardless of what supplier is picked. They make their profit on the delivery services, which is that middle part of the bill, and that will continue to be the delivery service part of the bill even after a switch is made to another provider. So we're not helping ComEd, nor are we hurting ComEd. Those are two different topics, and I don't want to make it seem like there's anything else going on there.
I understood. That's why I asked the question, because I understood this to be completely different than reliability, and this has nothing to do with the transformers and the lines and the poles, substations, none of that stuff. This all just has to do with...
Right, that's all part of what we call the delivery services.
Right, so all this has to do with the price that you pay. Let's see if I understand this. Basically, the concept is, and I haven't read the legislation, but I will, that the law allows a municipality to, via referendum, basically create a bargaining unit on behalf of all residents. And if people don't want to be in that, well, first of all, they don't have to pass the referendum, but then they also have the ability to opt out even if the referendum passes?
That is correct. The citizens have two chances to say no. They can vote no on the referendum if they're uncomfortable with the idea, or even if the referendum passes, part of the law requires that a communication be sent to all the eligible participants. That's one of the services that our company is part of, producing, is this letter with the proper language, the communication, and the citizens can say, no, I don't want to be part of it, if they don't wish to be.
Okay. So it's not imposing anything upon anyone. If they want out, they can stay out. Number two, let's assuming the referendum passes and the opt-out notices have been returned and you get the 85% participation as reflected in your example, is there an ongoing obligation by the municipality to continue to serve as the bargaining agent for the 85% in perpetuity, or is there an ability to say, this isn't working out, we're gonna stop?
That's a great question.
Or do you need to undo with another referendum?
We've had that question asked of us before, so we're fairly well prepared for that one, I hope. Let's say we sign a one-year deal, or you sign a one-year deal with one of our competitors. That deal ends at the end of the term, the one-year deal, and then when it ends, if you want to choose another provider, or if the citizens want to go back to ComEd, that's what happens. So no, you're not perpetually stuck with that provider if they've done a poor job, or if you want to switch to a better company that you found to be more appealing, or if you wish to just go back to the utility at the end of it. But the first agreement, be it 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, depending upon what the city council chooses, that will have to be followed through on, unless there's a default or someone breaks the contract, which hopefully wouldn't happen. But so it does end. The contract does end, and it can be renewed or not.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have in that regard is, essentially one of the other services that a company like yours provides is, rather than our staff now having to do all the negotiating, or I guess who we'll be negotiating with, there's other services. You said you avoid the consultants, so basically there's other services that are provided other than just we get a lower rate. There's additional services that are being provided by the alternative source.
Right. Now, for example, first of all, there's the consulting fee itself. We've seen most consulting fees in the range of 50 cents a megawatt hour. In Downers Grove case, that would add up to several $100,000 per year, which is less savings that the citizens would realize, because that would be embedded into the price.
If we were to do it ourselves.
Or if a consultant were to be hired to then just go out for an RFP, for companies like ours to just bid on the price, as I indicated as an example. There's that simple math. There is the services of, the mailers, the communication, the advertisements in the paper or billboards or radio or whatever the city council chooses to advertise, and the costs incurred with that. If the city wants us to do, or wants the company that they choose to do things like that, those are costs that either could be incurred by the city themselves or could be asked to be supported by the company that they've chosen. There's the education, like if we were to have an open house or an open hearing at the library or at the rec center or here, and we would have a number of them to educate the community, to ask questions, show them examples of the bill like we did tonight. There's that type of educational activity that could be provided if that's what the city council wants. You also, I thought I heard you mention green power during your remarks about the ComEd smart grid. That's another avenue that a lot of these towns are asking for. They want a higher percentage of green. There's different definitions of green. Green is a generic term that I'm using tonight, but if the city council wanted a higher percentage of green through biomass or through wind or through what have you, that's the type of thing that a supplier can arrange. Now, of course, that makes the cost go up a little bit, but that is the type of option that the city council could craft based on their own preferences.
One last question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I'm assuming that you need to enter into a relationship with an alternative provider like your company first, and then go through the steps of achieving the referendum, and then finding out, going through the opt-out process. So there's some upfront cost. Where I'm going with this is that presumably you could enter into this agreement, and the referendum fails. I mean, the two towns that had the referendum fail, I presume they had to hire somebody to help them get to that point. and do the education, do the radio, the billboards and everything, and then it failed, and so there was some out-of-pocket upfront cost in that instance. I imagine there would also be a situation, however unlikely, that the referendum passes, but then the opt-out percentage is just grossly disproportionate to what prior experience has been. You know, we have a electorate, for example, that says, sure, we can pass the referendum as long as they get the choice to opt out, and then everybody opts out. There again, there would be that upfront cost that you wouldn't reap the benefit of. Is that, am I way off base with that?
Both of those things are possible. I will say that in all the towns that we have been involved in, where we did actively educate the community and answer their questions, we've never had a referendum, not even come close to not passing when we've gotten involved in educating the community. So I guess that's a chance that our business accepts. And we also would accept the risk, at least I'll speak for my company, we would accept the risk if there was a high opt-out percentage for whatever reason, that we consider that part of the risk of doing business. The other interesting thing is, you noticed on that bill I showed you, slide number 11 I think it was, there was only one line item on the bill. There was no extra little adder like there was on the ComEd bill that I pointed out to you on slide number 10. There's one line, we take the risk of what the costs are and the scheduling and what the market's doing. And as I showed you on slide 10 with the ComEd example, they do have that little bucket of cost called the purchased electricity adjustment, which is avoided. And it's not a small amount. I mean, it's $7 on this person's bill. And, you know, and that's a lot when you add it up over a year and over, you know, all the bills that are in our village. So, but when you're with another supplier, not just our company, but with any of the suppliers, we have one line item and we assure that rate. That's been guaranteed in the contract for that term.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Questions or comments from the council on the presentation? Commissioner Schnell?
Just one question. If the community was to opt into something like this, you have school districts, you have the village, you have sanitary districts, you have other government entities involved in this. Would they have the ability to opt out? If they
That's a great question, Commissioner Schnell. This is for primarily residential customers.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with government?
But also, again, it's up to the city council to choose. Most of the other towns are also putting what we call their small commercial customers into the mix as well. And there's a definition of what small commercial means. And so just in your mind, just to visualize, like Angelo's Pizza would be a small commercial customer perhaps. But anything much bigger than that would be, they would strike their own deal and they would deal with one of our salespeople or one of our competitor companies to negotiate their own supply arrangement. Like all the schools already are with another supplier. Okay. You know, I'm sure most of the businesses in town of size have probably already switched. I'm sure the Jewel and Dominic's have switched a long time ago. And the hospital, I'm sure, has switched and what have you. So we're talking about here the residential and what we'll call small commercial. And again, if you chose not to have the small commercial in it, that would be the city council's choice. But all the towns we're working with so far have decided to put the small commercial in with the residential group.
So we're just talking the number of residents we have plus perhaps some other small.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, actually, to pick up on the other part of your question, which is this an opportunity for multiple taxing districts to get together and create an even larger bargaining unit? Like, for example, could you, assuming the schools weren't already in it, I'm just making this up, you could add other public entities.
Well, what is happening is, and my colleague Dean could comment on this as well, if not better, he is working for county level intergovernmental agreements. And so we have talked to like Will County and we may talk to DuPage County, so it is possible that towns can get together within a county.
Interesting.
And make it even bigger. And that would perhaps improve the price a little bit. But one of the things that Dean and I mean, certainly we're interested in that because that's more business and larger amount of accounts, but you know, Downers Grove is certainly big enough on its own to command a lot of attention, and adding another town to it wouldn't really make that much of a difference in my opinion. Okay. Nevertheless, if there was a countywide group going on, that wouldn't be a bad avenue to pursue.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Commissioner Barnett?
I had two questions. What, you kind of alluded to it before, is a typical contract 1 to 3 years?
Most of the ones we're seeing are 1 to 3 years, yes.
Okay. What happens to the, it's unlikely it's a lot, but the existing residential suppliers who may have already contracted with an alternative energy supplier, what happens to those situations? If they go through the referendum process, don't deal with the opt-out, how's
right, that's a great question. I myself have already switched. And so let's say Downers Grove went forward with this. I'm a resident in Downers Grove. I've already switched. So the way we've you know, there's this whole data exchange with ComEd of thousands and thousands of pieces of data and keeping the privacy of the citizens in mind as we go. And I don't want to bore you to death, but this is one of what we call the pre-aggregation services that we talk about. But to answer your specific question, my account will not even show up on the list to get the opt-out mailer because I'm already out, because I'm with somebody else. I've already made a switch. So ComEd will not even send that account number over. But for all the citizens who haven't switched yet, those are the account numbers that we get back, and those are the people who we send the mailer to decide if they want to opt out or not. And then there's people who are moving in and moving out, and you know, there's all those issues to deal with as well.
So in Illinois, ComEd and Ameren are essentially all the T&D, right? I mean, there's some municipal-owned equipment, but it's a very small amount. It's basically ComEd and Ameren.
Both ComEd and Ameren both divested of all their generation assets in the early 2000s.
So what really is going on is it's a brokerage in the market of electricity, kilowatts.
Well, there's dozens of what we call wholesale suppliers.
Okay.
So when I showed that forward curve graph of 2012 and 2013, that's what we call the forward curve, and that's what the wholesale suppliers offer. So companies like ours and the other 37 that compete with us, we buy wholesale blocks of power. You might think of us as Walmart. We buy train loads of bicycles. And if you want to buy a bicycle, you don't go to the Schwinn factory, you go to the Walmart and you buy a bicycle, and they bought a whole train load of bicycles of different kinds and styles, and you choose the one you want. And so I guess if you'll allow me to make that analogy, we're kind of the Walmart or the bulk, or we're the middleman, if you will. We don't manufacture the bicycle, but we buy a bulk of them on behalf of our customers. And there is more to it than that. I don't mean to oversimplify it. We have to schedule and forecast our customers' power with the grid every day. We are responsible for the load that we serve, and we got to make sure we have adequate capacity resources in place to meet their needs, and there's rules about all that.
That's kind of where I was headed. Is there ever a situation where any one of the alternative energy suppliers finds themselves on a given day short? How does that get handled in terms of the actual user?
Yes, that can happen, and we are financially obligated. Our customers will never see that. I mean, there is no PEA for us. We are responsible, and if we miss schedule or we miss forecast or we don't hedge our positions, and that's why, again, I showed that forward curve graph, because if we lock in a price, we're a risk-averse company, like many companies are. We're going to lock in our price right now. We're going to hedge it, so to speak. We don't want to take any risk on the market going up or down, and so we're going to lock it in right now. But if we do make a mistake and we don't buy enough or we buy too much, that's our business risk that we take, and our customers will not bear any additional cost one way or the other.
That's all I've got, Mayor.
And most suppliers feel that way too. We're not unique in that. That is the obligation that we all put ourselves through.
Any other questions or comments, Commissioner Rankin?
So you were explaining how you've already opted out. So people like you wouldn't be automatically opted in, but you're saying that you would get a better rate if you were part of this big picture, right?
Right. The rate that I would get the rate that I'm showing on slide, let's see, slide 11, if we could go one more slide forward, please. This person's rate is 6.45? 6.45. Now, that's not bad, and you could get that tonight if you went to the link on the internet, and you could choose that tonight yourself. But the rates we're seeing for aggregation are less than 6.
So does your company reach out to folks that are like you that have already chosen to do this, even though if the village then decides to aggregate? You understand what I'm trying to ask?
Yes, what will happen is my contract will expire with the company that I've chosen, and then at the end of that, I might want to go with what the village chose for me.
Okay.
But we don't want anyone breaking their contracts that they have with somebody else. That would not be right, and we don't advocate that. So that's why they're not part of the initial opt-out solicitation, because we want them to stay with.
That is a common service that is provided, that you have a list, and you go back through, additional mailers or callings. We have the right, turn on and call those.
Okay.
Rich, can I just make one point real quick?
Please.
Rich has mentioned a couple times our experience in aggregation. The bulk of that has come from Ohio. Ohio is at least a decade ahead of us in offering aggregation to residents. So when he talks about our experience, we've been doing it for about 12 years in Ohio. That's where that comes from. That's where the statistics on 85%, staying with the program and the like come from. Just wanted to make that clear. But so in that town, as I, answer your question, it comes from that perspective. We've had programs that follow on after the referendum is passed and the initial batch of customers sign up. It's up to each town, you know, and how they want to work with the provider, but it's a possibility. And I have one more question, or a little more detail behind one of the mayor's questions. You mentioned the 2 towns that did not pass referendum, assumption being they work with somebody and there was a sunk cost there. We're actually working with one of the 2 right now, and they're telling us that they believe it did not pass because they didn't partner with anybody. So it was kind of done in short notice. The bill was drafted, they put it on the ballot. They didn't do anything in the way of education. They feel it's important now, and so they're looking at alternatives to partner with somebody to do community outreach, town hall meetings, and other things that Rich mentioned. So just wanted to add that as well.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I see Oak Brook and Oak Park's kind of close, Wooddale. Are there any other DuPage County communities that you've talked to, and any other local communities that have already gone through and decided to put this on a referendum for the January 3rd?
Well, North Aurora actually chose Integris, and they're on that list of towns that passed a referendum. And they got a rate, I believe, of 5.75. I don't hold me to that, but I think it's 5.75, and that's one of the lower numbers that you'll see. But in answer to your question directly, I'm not sure how many towns have decided to go forward and put this on the referendum in March. You know, like I said, we've given this presentation now about 12 or 13 times. We've got 3 more this week, following tonight, with 3 other towns. So I think they're all kind of where you are now at this point of deciding, do we want to go forward with this, and what manner do we want to go forward with it? And so I think as of tonight, you're probably in the same boat as about 20 or 30 other towns.
The expectation is 50 or more are likely to do it.
We're probably still on the pier, not in the boat yet. We're just hearing about this for the first time tonight.
You know, and that's a good segue, Mayor. An item such as this is a discussion item only, and per our policy, the next step would be the council to direct staff whether to do or prepare additional information for next steps. And so what I'd like to propose is, in the coming days and weeks, we'll be talking about what our work plan looks like for the next months and all next year, and we can decide how and if we would like to move forward at that time.
Right, only because we have a lot of other things on our plate. But thank you very much for coming and making the presentation. It was very informative, and I certainly know a lot more about municipal aggregation now than I did 30 minutes ago. So we very much appreciate you coming down and being as neutral as possible. That was appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.